Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hi, everyone. Today we're thrilled to have Mark Shaiken back on the show to talk about his latest thriller, Cram Down. It's a tale of high-stakes bankruptcy drama, missing persons, and a race against the clock. Here's the inside scoop on the author. Mark Shaiken lives with his wife Loren and their dog Emily in Denver, Colorado. He schooled at Haverford College and Washburn University and practiced commercial bankruptcy law for almost 4 decades before moving on to writing, board service, and his photography and music. He is the author of 4 novels in his 3J legal thriller series, including Cram Down, the book we're going to visit with Mark about today. He also has a nonfiction title available called And Just Like That, Essays on a Life Before, During, and After the Law. You can learn more about Mark and his work at markshaikenauthor.com. Hi, Mark. Welcome back to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, Sherry. Yeah, thanks for having me back on.
I can't wait to talk about your newest book, Cram Down. So why don't you just get us started by telling us a little bit about the story?
So Cram Down is another one of the legal financial thrillers in the 3J thriller series that I've been working on since about 2020. So it's been 3 years now of the star, Josephina Julian Jones, 3J to her friends. And in Cram Down, a husband and wife come to hire her. They own a company named Abode, and Abode builds homes in Kansas City for lower income marginalized community members, not unlike what Habitat does in so many cities, including here in Denver.
Yeah.
And Abode had a fairly large line of credit with a local bank in the book named Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth in the book is a Black-owned bank and has been since the 1880s when it was chartered by the current owner's great, I don't remember how many greats there are, grandparents, who had migrated to the Kansas City during what was called in the Civil War the Exoduster migration, which was the migration of Black people from the South. They were trying to get to Kansas, which was a free state, but they ended up in Kansas City, which was in Missouri, which was a former below the Mason-Dixon line southern state. So they have this large line of credit. There are 2 brothers now who own the bank, the great-great-great-grandkids of the original founders. And the 2 have very different visions for the bank. One brother named Amadi, who's the president, believes that it's the bank's purpose to continue the family's longstanding mission of helping the underserved communities in Kansas City, including the Black community. And the other brother is all about cryptocurrency and making money and chastises the president that the bank is a for-profit entity and therefore it should be focused on profit, not service.
Yeah.
And the president had formerly controlled the bank, but had lost control through a series of personal events to this brother, Jordan. And then the president disappears mysteriously, and the loan is terminated by I'll call him the bad brother. And and 3J, in order to save the company and the 2 individuals, the Franklins, she has to try to find Amadi before the couple of weeks are up when everything kind of gets flushed down the toilet. And so she puts together a team to try to find the missing brother. The mob is involved, Kansas City. Kansas City has a very rich history of mob activity, I guess I'll call it. And so I've created an Irish mobster, Robbie McFadden, who sits atop the Irish mob in Kansas City and went to Wharton, so he runs his organization like a business, and that's one of his favorite phrases, it's just business.
Yeah. And
so the whole book is the sort of frenetic search for the brother before the clock runs out. And, is he going to be alive when they find him? Will he be dead? And you sort of get into certainly you're always in the head of 3J because she's the star, but you sort of meet Robbie McFadden and find out what makes him tick. You understand what makes the bad bank brother tick. And you meet some of the mobsters in the book that I've created, some of whom are good bad guys and some of whom are very bad guys.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to put it. And before we go any further, congratulations are in order because I understand in its first week, Cram Down debuted in Amazon's 100 bestseller list for financial thrillers.
Yeah, that was kind of stunning. I appreciate everybody that went out and got the book and read it. And that's not happened before, although it certainly makes me feel warm and fuzzy when it does happen. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
I love how each book in your 3J Legal Thrillers series uses a bankruptcy term as its title. Why did you choose Cram Down as the legal focal point for this story?
So you're correct. All of the titles of the book come from something that's either expressly in the bankruptcy law or just part of the bankruptcy law fiber over the more than a decade since the original Bankruptcy Act was passed in 1898. And all of them really have two meanings. If you've read the books, not only is it that something going on in the case that 3J is handling that addresses that particular bankruptcy issue, hopefully not in a way that makes everybody fall asleep, because I recognize bankruptcy isn't wildly exciting for the uninitiated. But it also has another meaning. And so in Cram Down, it's a pretty crass term to find in a federal law, and it actually is not a phrase that appears directly in the bankruptcy code. It's what the judges over the years have dubbed this particular process in bankruptcy, because it's kind of the ultimate fight in a business bankruptcy if it's activated by one side or the other. And the loser comes away feeling like this whole thing was crammed down their throat. They don't really get a vote, or if they had a vote, their vote is overruled by the judge, and the plan of how they're going to get paid or not get paid back is sort of forced down their throat. And that's the sort of history of the phrase in bankruptcy. In the book, there's a whole lot of things that are being crammed down one party's throat or another that may not be the legal things. And so I felt like it was a fun phrase to have more than one meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Let's talk about some of your characters, starting with 3J, Josephina Jillian Jones. She's just a captivating lead in the series, and I feel like in Cram Down we get to see more of her vulnerabilities, and especially through the kind of glimpses into her past through her inner thoughts or memories. What inspired you to add these new layers to her character and kind of, I guess, explore them or show the reader in this way?
Well, and that's a great question. 3J is a New Orleans kid who grew up in the lower Ninth Ward and then another neighborhood named Treme down there. And I've just been fascinated with New Orleans. We started going there, some 25 years ago, at least once a year. In fact, we're heading back there end of October. So first, it made sense to me, since I love New Orleans so much and it's just so rich in its own history, that the lead character have some connection to New Orleans, because I have some connection to New Orleans. So that would be number one. Number two, if you spend any time before Katrina or after Katrina in the lower Ninth Ward, you start to realize how very difficult it is to grow up in New Orleans as a lower middle class, kid, let alone a lower middle class Black kid in a very southern, part of the country.
Yeah.
And I always find that kind of compelling. So there's a lot of opportunity to sort of develop that out. And then the third thing that you learn in Cram Down is that despite what her father told her about not always running toward danger, she has a real problem avoiding that. We learned that in Unfair Discrimination, where they had come up with this great plan. The team had come up with this great plan of how to take down the white nationalists, which didn't involve 3J, and she was supposed to not, be out on the street running toward a guy with a knife.
Right.
And you start to learn that she understands that. She's super smart, but she just has a real hard time avoiding that. And you start to learn a bit about that. And that probably comes from just kids I knew growing up in high school in Connecticut. So it's a real gumbo of different things that influence the development of a character. But with 3J, I just am sort of enjoying the going to New Orleans and having a list of things I want to figure out to add to the next book. So in October, when we go back, and I have a guide that I've met who I love down there, and I must sound like a very untypical tourist when I call her and say I'm coming for 3 days. And here's what I need to know. I need to find a high school that she went to where she could have excelled at, track and soccer.
Oh, yeah.
So the guy reads the books, and I call and I say this, and you can hear her and her husband in the background coming up. Oh, well, she probably went to this high school, so we'll take you there.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So a lot of what you'll read in the book about 3J's background is based on true things that are in New Orleans. You know, the whole trip that she took to City Park with her father in the flashback, and Cram Down, that's a real park with those are real trees there, and there really is a beignet restaurant there that the locals go to.
Yeah. Well, that just makes it much more authentic.
And then most all of the Kansas City historical things, including the whole discussion in the book about the history of the mob in Kansas City, that's all true to the best of my ability. So the thing I enjoy is sort of coming up with a story that's fictional, but having it sit in a bowl that's completely nonfiction.
Absolutely. And I do have some questions around that, but I want to finish up with your characters first. This was a toss-up for me between 3J, who's going to be my star always, of course, but then Robbie McFadden. I absolutely love that character. He's the villain. He's the big bad mob boss, but he's not your typical mob boss. He has academic credentials and he's like almost like a historian too for Kansas City. So shed some light on how you crafted, well, I don't know, maybe just such a complex adversary.
Well, he is the Irish, mobster who went to Wharton. He loves history, Kansas City history in particular. He's a great way for me to have a voice in the book to talk about the things that are Kansas City history that I enjoy without sounding like the omniscient narrator is boring everybody to tears. With little snippets that are being forced, Robbie gives me a method by which things that probably have something to do with the current plot, in the present, relate to something that really did happen in the past. So Robbie, for example, will wax on about his recollection of the history of kidnapping in Kansas City during the Great Depression, which was quite a money-making proposition in the city at the time. And some extremely famous, at least famous for Kansas City, prominent families had people kidnapped for no purpose other than, pay a ransom, which was the money-making proposition. And perhaps a little bit like me, Robbie can talk too much about history and bore the audience, but unlike me, his audience is scared of him that he'll have them, killed. And so they don't ever actually express to him that, they've had enough. They can't stand any more history lessons. He prattles on. He lives on Ward Parkway, which is where all the big mansions are in Kansas City from the turn of the century. Very proud that he lives a few doors down from where the biggest mob boss and who ran the city without being an elected official, Tom Pendergast, actually did live on Ward Parkway. And so, the fun part of this is if you're not from Kansas City, it's fine. None of this really makes the book unapproachable. And if you are from Kansas City, you start emailing me late at night that you're at this part of the book and you didn't really know that there was a woman who was kidnapped from her bathtub in the 30s. But I don't know where Robbie actually came from. I didn't go to Wharton, but it just seemed like a fun character that came to me and is easy to develop and might actually appear again in subsequent books in a little bit different context, playing around with.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I really enjoyed his character and the way that you used him to incorporate history, how it flowed, through him and and especially the part about his underlings being afraid to confront him about, too much history. I enjoyed the historical parts. I love learning about, the history of places because we're America. We don't have a really deep history, like if you compare it to another country, but we have some pretty neat little historical towns, and Kansas City is one of them for sure.
Yeah, kind of not a place anybody thinks to stop off when they're flying across the country, but it's actually beautiful, and it is quite rich in history. It was pretty prominent during the Depression because it was a place that people from all over the country came for wild weekends because Prohibition was more of a suggestion in Kansas City than a law. So, if you wanted a party and that involved drinking and red light districts, Kansas City was the go-to place.
Yeah, that's funny. Suggestion. So tell us a bit about the dynamics between the Banker twins, Amadi and Jordan Brown. It's really an intense sibling rivalry.
Yeah, they're twins, and they're as unlike each other as, twins can be. And, one is, Amadi is continuing the family legacy of serving the community, even though it means that the bank's, return on investment is lower. Amadi is willing to make loans to support the community, even if it means that the bank doesn't make as much money from that loan. Mm-hmm. And there are many banks throughout the United States that are more community oriented. In fact, the term people use for them is community banks. Mm-hmm. And, they're banks, and so they still have regulators and have to, be a bank, but their portfolio is different. And they probably do make less money for the ownership than a bank that is a little less community oriented and has stricter guidelines for lending and things like that. The brother, Jordan, who did not grow up at the feet of his parents in the bank learning the trade, but comes back to the bank when the parents die. The brother, Jordan, is greedy, and his vision is that the bank turns to greener pastures, meaning money, and they do that with something that is, happening now in banks, which is, fintech it's called, and cryptocurrency and blockchain. Things that we all hear about are in banks and developing very quickly. And, for a forward-looking, profit-oriented banker, they're the wave of the future. But to go that path, he believes you've got to leave behind all of these borrowers like Abode, because mm-hmm. they're dragging the bank down. And when he explains why he doesn't like the Abode loan, he sounds like a white banker from the 1930s and 40s who's redlining. He doesn't like that loan because it's in effect loans to minority communities, and he can't sell the loans. And if he foreclosed on the loans and took back the properties in the neighborhoods that the properties were located in, he couldn't sell them. And so he doesn't really want to be involved in that kind of collateral, which is sort of one of the cornerstones of redlining.
Yeah.
You don't do it because you don't want to ultimately, help those kinds of people, quote unquote, and you don't ultimately want to have that kind of collateral.
Which is interesting for his character, considering his family background and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. But he hates history. I mean, he has these arguments with his brother, who always tells him that you can't run from your past. It's part of us. And he doesn't care. The bad brother, Jordan, doesn't care about history. He's completely forward-looking. History just gets in the way.
Yeah.
Which is why when he meets his old friend Robbie McFadden, because they went to high school together, and Robbie starts prattling on about history, it almost makes Jordan go crazy.
Yeah, and he can't say anything about it either.
No, right, exactly. He can yell at his brother. He doesn't yell at the mob boss.
Right, yeah. Yeah, their relationship was so adversarial. It was like next level. One of your characters, the bankruptcy judge, oh gosh, and I can't think of his name right now, but I love him. I'm always eager to turn, or I'll have an opinion. Oh, I can't wait to hear what he says about that, and he's a fun character.
He is, Judge Robertson, who lives in a part of Kansas City named Romanelli Gardens. And when I graduated from law school, the first job I got was clerking for a bankruptcy judge who grew up in Romanelli Gardens. And it was still probably the peak of my career as far as interesting and such a great job, and I'm so lucky to have worked for Judge Pusateri. There are parts of Judge Robertson that I'm sure either intentionally or subconsciously are drawn from Judge Pusateri's life. Mm-hmm. And I always thought Judge Pusateri would go on the bench and was very wise, and people listened to him as a result. So there's that sort of fountain of information or experience that I had in my own life that probably feeds quite a bit into the creation of Judge Robertson. Mm-hmm. Certainly Judge Robertson's relationship with his current law clerk, Jennifer Cuello, is pretty similar to what I experienced working for Judge Pusateri.
Mm-hmm. And those characters also provide another outlet for you to kind of familiarize the reader with some of the bankruptcy law. So, yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully that part of the formula that there's going to be something bankruptcy about the books, because 3J is a bankruptcy lawyer, it gets explained in a way that's not overload. It's understandable. It's a little overwhelming, to think that you're going to read a book that has some elements of bankruptcy in it. And some of the reviews say that it's handled well, and there's a handful of the reviewers that pop up that say it was too much. But it's hard to balance. When you're doing a legal book, a legal thriller, there's going to have to be some law in it.
Yeah.
Even Michael Connolly, when he does The Lincoln Lawyer, they're in court. There's all this criminal law stuff going on. It seems very real, and it seems like he's quite bent on it being accurate. And I could see how somebody who likes crime, stories would find that, too much as well. So it is hard to balance that, how much to tell versus, how to smooth it out so it's not overwhelming.
Yeah, I think it was very well done because of the judge's character and his interaction with his law clerk. And it was just for me, it was very informative and entertaining. So,
well, good.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. You talked briefly about the ethical complexities surrounding housing for the underprivileged. Why did you choose that as the central conflict of your story?
Housing is one of those things that, post my law career, I'm super interested in and involved in. I'm on the Habitat Metro Denver's finance committee. I'm on the board of an organization here that tries to help keep the elderly in their homes, as long as possible by matching them with somebody that can live with them and help out as they get older. So the idea of, housing for the underprivileged or the aged is, part of me, probably my future me. So, and a habitat model is actually pretty complicated. Surprisingly, it's not just we build houses and put, underprivileged people into the homes. So weaving that into as part of the real important part of the story plot seemed kind of natural just based on what I'm doing now, post-law.
Right.
It's an important issue. Redlining is, a terrible thing. It probably still goes, well, that definitely still goes on. Banks are a little savvier about how they do it, but it still goes on. And Kansas City has, unfortunately, a very rich history of both segregation, because it was a below the Mason-Dixon line city on the Missouri side, and a very unfortunate but prominent role in how to keep certain people out of certain neighborhoods. They had developers in Kansas City who specialized in that and took their plan kind of national and gave it to the rest of the country, unfortunately. To talk about housing in a book set in Kansas City and ignore the whole history of housing in Kansas City is kind of a whitewashing of what really went on. So it seemed kind of natural to sort of draw on all of that. And once you get started on it, you're making cuts about what you're going to tell rather than having to struggle to fill pages because there isn't enough information. There's an overwhelming amount of information in Kansas City. And so I like that aspect also, that I can kind of mold it down rather than build it up in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So do all of your novels include an ethical element as well?
Yeah, I try. And in most of them, there's something happening that's close to the line, as I'll call it. And 3J and her colleague, William Pascal, have got to decide in each book whether they're going to step over that line, whether the ends justify the means, whether as a lawyer, the ends can ever justify the means, and whether you can ever really step over the line. And a lot of the times in the books, that line involves some kind of computer or technological invasion or hack. And, hacks are felonies, despite, the ransomware stories that we all read about these days, they're crimes. So you have two lawyers trying to decide whether what they're thinking of doing will step over that line. And in this book, they have two clients that are very adamant about the line, that they don't step over the line. Things, but we're not going to step over the line. So without, giving away what the technological dilemma is in Cram Down, it's fun for me to give Pascal and 3J that headache of how far are they going to go.
Yeah. And we know 3J is always ready to push that envelope. Now I'm getting a clear picture of how you bring all your stories together just by talking with you. It's very personal.
Parts are. I mean, truth be told, I don't know any Robbie McFadden's. So
right.
Parts of it are personal. Parts of it are just, made up from when I walk the dog. So I don't. Not all of it is from personal experience, but a lot of it is. I think If you've
Yeah.
been a lawyer working, a lot of the clients were banks. You learn all of these things. You see some of it unfold, and it's just in there. So it's certainly going to be part of the mix.
Yeah. Maybe authentic is a better word. I don't know. But yeah, I can feel the influences from our conversation in your books. So you have these amazing characters, a great plot line, history, bankruptcy, ethical complexities. And then you've also enriched the story with various cultural elements like jazz music and amazing food. How do these elements contribute to the atmosphere of the novel, and how important are they to the overall story to you?
They're important to me. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything's important to me would make for a good story. Not at all. I recognize that, but they're important to Kansas City. Kansas City and jazz are, if you're a jazz historian, which I'm not, but if you were a jazz historian, Kansas City would be one of the first things that you mention when you start to talk about the birth of jazz, New Orleans as well. So, in the teens and the 20s and 30s, Kansas City was not only a hub for drinking and red light districts, but it was just a huge hub for American jazz as it began to develop. Charlie Parker was in Kansas City, Count Basie, and a guy named Jay McShann was there. Just all these famous band leaders or soloists like Parker showed up in Kansas City and then stayed for a while. So it's hard to talk about Kansas City and not acknowledge that it was a jazz capital at the birth of jazz.
Yeah.
It is the barbecue capital of the world, although I recognize that people in Texas and Tennessee may have other views. If you've been there, you'll fight that one to the death. And so it's a funny place to talk about food because, people will actually argue who makes the best sauce, who has the best smoke, and who has the best rub. And, you'll go to a real greasy barbecue joint and you'll see, bank presidents in there, arguing about whether this really is the best barbecue or not. So it's kind of a funny mix of a lot of influences. And so not only does it give another element to the flavor of Kansas City, but to me, it's hard to write a book set in Kansas City and not give some nod to those types of things because they're there every day.
Well, yeah. And as a reader, I love that you have made it so authentic, and you can definitely feel that in your writing. How has writing this series impacted you as a writer?
Hopefully I get better, as I go along on this fiction journey that I'm on. I've written, any lawyer would say they've written a ton during their career. So during the 40 years I was practicing, writing was what you do.
Yeah.
Writing and talking in court. But you don't write fiction, or at least you hope, you wrote in court was fiction. And so the whole process of learning how to shift from writing, nonfiction, be it, court stuff or the memoir that I wrote of the not famous lawyer, you hope that you're going to learn each time because it is quite different to sort of create characters, create the setting, the plot, make sure it sticks together well. If you kind of go through a developmental editing process, either a self-developmental editing process when you finish the first draft or hire somebody to take a look at it, you realize there are parts that need work. They don't flow together as well as real life just flows together with nonfiction. So I'm hoping that as I finish the fourth and soon we'll start the fifth in the 3J series, that they do get better. They stick together better and the storyline is a little better and I'm not head hopping quite as much as I might have in the first book.
Well, yeah, it is learning and growing. So now I realize Cram Down just came out. And again, as a reader, I want to know when the next book is coming out. So I guess in the future, do you have plans to write more in the 3J series, or do you have another avenue you want to explore?
I'm taking them one by one. There is another book in the 3J series. It'll be tentatively named For Cause, another phrase from the bankruptcy code that can have a double entendre. So that'll be the fifth in the series. And in 2022, I actually wrote two of these books. One came out in April, one came out in December. And honestly, that was a little hard on the old guy here. And not only did it become confusing as to the marketing of the books, it's hard to market, I'll call it book number one in 2022 when book number two is in the editing phase. And I need to run to give a presentation to a book club on book number one, but I need to get the edits back to the editor on book number two. So it was a lot. So I vowed after that, we'll see how good I am about keeping this vow, that I would only do one book a year in the 3J series. So this book just came out, I think it officially came out like September 17th on Amazon anyway. Mm-hmm. And well, I have lots of notes for the next one, and I need to go to New Orleans to find this high school that 3J went to and take notes.
Yeah.
I really would hope that I wouldn't start writing the next one until between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that way I can guarantee that I won't have two books come out in the same year. So I would guess that the next one would come out between April and June next year-ish, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that is an awful lot, trying to do two at once. And it's an awful lot just to put out one book a year. So I can't imagine doing two.
Yeah, amen to that. It is. And that, you don't realize it. I was like every other author. The hardest part should be the writing. And it turns out the more time-consuming part is the marketing. Mm-hmm. And that's probably because I'm truly learning things that work and things that don't work on the fly, when it comes to marketing.
Yeah. Well, and that changes too. So it does. Constantly kind of have to find what works for you, but then be open to, like new things that come along too. So yeah, it's it's always a learning experience for sure. So as you know, I was introduced to your books through read reviews, of course. But I wasn't the one that read your first three books. One of our reviewers did. And I became interested through her reviews. So I listened to all of the audiobooks of 1, 2, and 3. And so I was excited when Cram Down came out, because this was the first book I actually read first before I listened to the audiobook. So all of that long, segue into when is the audiobook coming out,
So there's something else that, of course, I knew nothing about before I started down the path of having the books come out in audiobook format. So I've met a narrator, Jimmy Moreland, who used to be in Texas and now is in Maine, who I love. And so he's narrated all of the books, and he's a little backed up right now. But I want him to continue to narrate the books because I like the consistency, and he's now learned the characters, and I just think he does a great job. So I think the audiobook comes out toward the end of October, because I'm in the queue for him to start reading it. But he's very accurate and very diligent, amazingly diligent, and very fast. And I met him through the audition process on ACX, which is yet another Amazon company that makes it so easy for authors like me to get paired up with a narrator.
Yeah. And
so the first book that he narrated, which was Fresh Start, he was one of like 6 auditions that for me. And I remember you upload 3 or 4 pages from the book so that the people interested will all be reading the same pages. And I remember telling my wife, okay, I've done this. If I get like 1 audition, it would be a miracle. And, I got like 15 in the first 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
People got it and immediately read it and then sent me their draft narration. And I would say that of the 15, there were 15 different readings. It was amazing how different people, many of whom are actors doing this as a source of income.
Yeah.
How different they sounded. And I just liked the way Jimmy Moreland sounded. Didn't know him from Adam, and we went back and forth on some emails. And, 4 books later, here we are.
Yeah. Having listened to the first 3 simultaneously, while I was reading Cram Down, I could actually hear his voice.
He's really good. So my lead character is a woman, and he's not. But he's really good at changing sort of almost the tone or inflection of his voice without faking that it's a woman's voice.
Right.
He does a really nice job so that you always know it's 3J talking or thinking, even though he's not raising his voice 3 octaves and trying to sound like a woman.
Right. Yeah.
And that's hard to do, and hard to do it in a way that it's consistent, but he does a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So I'll be the first one to get your audiobook. Well, Mark, is there anything else you wanted to add today?
No, I mean, anybody that wants to sort of follow along can go to markshaikenauthor.com and sign up for the newsletter. It's not a spam thing. It doesn't go out all that often. but just sort of to follow along what's happening with the book or me. And that's probably the best way to get involved and, activate the relationship more than just reading the books.
Right. Okay, great. Well, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. I was so excited to talk about Cram Down. And so congratulations for the successful launch and, sharing more about the story with us.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate being on. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Mark Shaiken, author of Cram Down. You can learn more about Mark and his work at markshaikenauthor.com. And be sure and check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.